Okay.
Okay, Joel, unmute yourself. Joe, unmute yourself.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Really appreciate it this early Sunday morning. Ron will do a fantastic program as always, I'm sure. And we're going to get started right away. And I'm going to ask Alan Zarrow to do the introduction. And Alan, it's all yours.
Thank you, Joel, and welcome everybody to this morning's talk. All of us at Brotherhood want to thank each and every one of you for signing in and tuning in. Wow, what a great topic the Beshert Brotherhood is presenting this morning. A topic which requires someone with the utmost passion, not only for Jewish history, but also with an incredibly deep-rooted affection for the New York City County of Kings. It requires a very, very special person. Unfortunately, on our budget, we were only able to get Ron Schweiger. But seriously, folks, there is no one better to get to speak on this topic than Ron. Not only is he our temple historian, but as many of you know, he is also the current official historian of the borough of Brooklyn. You may have read his quotes in a myriad of publications. You may have also heard him on the radio or seen him giving interviews on television. No doubt you have also met him at a Brooklyn Cyclones baseball game. But this morning, he's all ours. I have consistently said to anyone who would listen, and I pity that person who listens to me, but I have consistently said to anyone that it is always an honor for me to have my little temple talks introduced by a real historian. But today, I am merely and gladly returning the favor. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the Brotherhood of Beshert presents famous Jews from Brooklyn and Mr. Ron Schweiger.
Thank you, Alan. First of all, I want to thank Alan very, very much for helping me to set up the program this morning. I couldn't have done it without him, and I hope it goes flawlessly. We'll see what happens. As you know, Brooklyn is one of the centers of Judaism in the whole world. There are more Jews in Brooklyn than anywhere else in the world, except perhaps in Tel Aviv, Israel. We'll get to that a little bit later on. Now, it's not really known who the very first Jews were that came to Brooklyn. But if we go back to 1654, just a few years ago, 23 Jews arrived in New Amsterdam, which is the lower part of Manhattan. They came from Recife, Brazil. And the governor of New Amsterdam, Peter Stuyvesant, he didn't want the Jews. He wanted to send them back where they came from. But a lot of the people who were helping to settle in New Amsterdam from the Netherlands, they wanted the Jews to stay. They said, we need craftspeople, we need carpenters, we need people that would help us to get developed here. Now, there was no internet back then, so they had to send, Peter Stuyvesant sent another ship back to the Netherlands, which took about 3 months to make a message to the king. Well, it took another 3 months for the message to get back to New Amsterdam. And the king's message to Peter Stuyvesant was, the Jews must stay. And the reasoning is, the Dutch West India Company was very much financed by the Jews in the Netherlands. So that's how the Jews got started coming here to what we now call the New York area. Among those 23 Jews was a gentleman named Asser Levy. Now, Asser Levy never really lived in Brooklyn, but he lived in New Amsterdam. But he did buy land in Brooklyn, but he didn't live on that land. Now, if you go today down Ocean Parkway towards Coney Island, when you get to the very end of Ocean Parkway and you make that sharp right onto Surf Avenue into Coney Island, there's a big park right there at that turn. That is Asser Levy Seaside Park. And it's been that name for a long time. Now, it's not really known who the first Jew was. There's no documentation of that. But if we look at the Brooklyn Directory in the year 1838, 1839, it states the name of Benjamin Levy, who was an auctioneer, and he was located at 79 Fulton Street, which is now downtown Brooklyn. There was also a Daniel Levy, a craftsman, at 175 Pearl Street in Brooklyn. Now, the first Brooklyn Jews did not have enough people to have a congregation, but if they wanted to worship, they had to row across the East River to New Amsterdam, to Manhattan, because that's where more Jews had settled and already had a congregation going, a small one. So for Shabbat services and the high holidays, they had to row across. There were no bridges yet back then, no bridges. In 1854, 12 Jews in Brooklyn organized a religious society, and it developed into one of the first congregations in Brooklyn. It was Congregation Beit Israel. It's B-A-I-T-H, Beit Israel. And the first president of that congregation was Solomon First, F-U-R-S-T, Solomon First. His son, Michael First, was the first Jew from Brooklyn to ever attend college, and that was Yale University. Very interesting tidbit right there. Now, if we jump to 1908, Beit Israel, the one that was established in 1854, merged. There's that word merged again, folks who are listening right now, all right? Beit Israel in 1908 merged with Talmud Torah Anshe Emes. Today, that is known as the Kane Street Synagogue in Cobble Hill in downtown Brooklyn. Now, it is said that the Kane Street Synagogue is the oldest continuous congregation in Brooklyn. And in a sense, it is. But it started as a merge of Beit Israel and Anshe Emes. And they're not in their original place. They started on Bond Street. They moved to another location near Atlantic Avenue and eventually ended up in Kane Street. And it's known as the Kane Street Synagogue. And a very famous person was bar mitzvahed there. The composer, Aaron Copland, was bar mitzvahed at the Kane Street Synagogue. And some of you may know one of his masterpiece pieces of music called Appalachian Spring. And we're right now in the middle of spring here in Brooklyn now. Now, I read something on the internet that was sent to me about a month and a half ago, claiming that there's another congregation in Brooklyn that is the oldest. And they said it was the Greenpoint Shul in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, on the northwest corner of the borough. Well, I did a little research, and it turns out that the Greenpoint Shul is not the oldest, but it is the longest continuous congregation in the same building, going back to 1886. It's at, I think the address is 176 Noble Street in Greenpoint. So that's the longest continuous congregation in Brooklyn, the Greenpoint Shul. And by the way, it is not Orthodox, it's not conservative, it's not Reform. It's all. Anyone who wants to join and become a member can become a member at the Greenpoint Shul. Okay, now we get to 1848. Congregation Kahal Kodesh Beth Elohim was established in Williamsburg. Keep the name Beth Elohim in mind. By 1861, a second Beth Elohim was formed. Today it is known in Park Slope as the Garfield Temple. So the Garfield Temple in Park Slope was established in 1861. And that is a Reformed congregation. It was the first Reformed congregation in Brooklyn. In 1865, Joseph Wechsler and Mr. Abraham opened up a dry goods store on Fulton Street. But you know what? We'll get to that a little bit later, okay? There's a very interesting story about that. Now, how many Jews came to Brooklyn? Well, from the 1870s to about 1917, more than 2 million Jews immigrated into the United States, mostly from Russia and Poland, from Eastern Europe. Keep that in mind. 2 million into the United States. And they came mostly here to the East Coast of the United States. Many settled in the New York area. Now, in 1883, the Brooklyn Bridge opened, which allowed very overcrowded lower Manhattan, a lot of people to escape the overcrowdedness of the tenements and move across Brooklyn into Brooklyn with their own horses and wagons. They didn't have to take a ferry. That was in 1883. By 1898, the 5 boroughs of New York City consolidated into one city, the greatest city of New York. Here in Brooklyn, we call that the mistake of 98, because a lot of people in Brooklyn wanted to remain a separate city at that time. Now, in 1903, the Williamsburg Bridge opened. Now, the Williamsburg Bridge connects Williamsburg, Brooklyn, to the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And I'm sure most of you know the Lower East Side of Manhattan was a very, very high, intense Orthodox community. And it was overcrowded, cold water flats, tenements, and now a lot of them started to move across this new 1903 Williamsburg Bridge, moving across into Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And this was the very first influx of the Orthodox into Williamsburg. The second influx was after World War II, when many of them who did survive the Holocaust came here to the United States, and a lot to Brooklyn. And by the way, at that time, with all those Jews immigrating across into Brooklyn from Manhattan, the Williamsburg Bridge got a nickname. It was known as the Jews' Highway. From 1904 to 1908, about 640,000 Jews immigrated into the United States. In 1907, Brighton Beach Baths opened and lasted until 1997. Now, I know many of you probably went to Brighton Beach Baths, as I did as a kid, and it was a great place during the summer, that's for sure. So now we had all these Jews immigrating into the United States, many settling in the New York City area and many here in Brooklyn. In 1911, and even a little earlier than that, you know what? I'm not going to get into the history of Temple Beth Emeth and Progressive Temple of Beth Ahavat Shalom, because all of that was printed up in one of the journals we had in the last couple of years. And if you ever want, any of you want copies of that, just let the office know or let me know, and we'll send to you a printed copy of the history of Beth Emeth, which went through a lot of mergers. Progressive Temple of Beth Ahavat Shalom went through many mergers, and all these mergers now are Beth Shalom Emeth Reformed Temple. A wonderful merge. There's that word merge again, my goodness. Well, it saved all of these congregations. That's what saved it. Now, in 1913, Ebbets Field opened. Now, you might say, what does that have to do with the Jews of Brooklyn? Well, it's important. How many of you brought matzah sandwiches to Ebbets Field during Passover? It was during the baseball season in April. I know I did. My brother and I, my mother would give us homemade chopped liver sandwiches on matzah, and we took them on the Brighton line. We got on the train at Kings Highway, got off at the Prospect Park station with our matzah sandwiches in a bag with chopped liver. We bought the Cokes at the ballpark, and we watched the Brooklyn Dodgers play. But there's another Jewish connection. In 1947, Jackie Robinson, who was not Jewish, became the first player to play in the black player to play in the major leagues. And by the way, that anniversary is coming up in just a couple of days, April 15th, 1947. The Jewish connection is one of the first members of the Brooklyn Dodgers staff to sit next to Jackie Robinson in the dugout was one of the Dodger coaches. He was Jewish, Jake Pitler. And he sat next to Jackie, one of the first to sit next to him in the dugout. And over the years, the Brooklyn Dodgers had quite a few other Jewish players. Of course, we know Sandy Koufax. How about Larry Sherry and Norm Sherry, brothers? And that was the battery, the pitcher and the catcher, two brothers, Jewish. And of course, we had Cal Abrams. Cal Abrams used to hang out on Kings Highway. When I did a program for the Bellagio Golf Country Club in Florida several years ago, I was invited to do down there to do an old nostalgic program on Brooklyn. In the audience was Cal Abrams' widow, May Abrams, and I was told that she was going to be in the audience. So I included in one of my slides to show to them a picture of 7 Brooklyn Dodgers at the dugout, and one of them was Cal Abrams. And she was so pleased to see that slide on the screen. Well, the Jewish population in Brownsville, Brooklyn, reached 250,000. That's 250,000 in 1920. That's just in Brownsville in 1920. By 1923, the Brooklyn Jewish population approached 740,000 compared to 706,000 in Manhattan. So now we're ahead of Manhattan in the Jews by 1923. In 1929, a gentleman named Harry Rosen opened up Enduro's Sandwich Shop on Fulton Street by DeKalb Avenue in downtown Brooklyn. Enduro's Sandwich Shop. Well, how many of you had Junior's cheesecake? Well, Mr. Rosen's son, his sons took over the restaurant in 1950, and since they are the juniors of Mr. Rosen, that name became Junior's. So Junior's, which is still operating on Fulton Street and DeKalb Avenue, got its start as Enduro's Sandwich Shop in 1950. By 1930, Brooklyn's population, now not the Jewish population, but Brooklyn's population reached 2.5 million people. 2.5 million in Brooklyn alone, which made it the 3rd largest city in the United States, population-wise, just Brooklyn. By 1937, the number of Jews in Brooklyn, you got a pencil, write this number down. By 1937, the total number of Jews in Brooklyn totaled 947,765, approaching almost 1 million Jews. During the 1940s, the Jewish population approached the 1 million mark. Brooklyn had more Jews than any other city in the world, including Tel Aviv by the early 1940s. Now, after the Belt Parkway opened in 1941, many Brooklynites began to move to the quote unquote supposedly greener pastures of Long Island. And a Jew, Mr. Levitt, built Levittown out in Long Island. By the way, he built another Levittown in southeastern in Pennsylvania near Philadelphia. So if you remember some of the early advertisements in the newspapers back in the 40s and 50s, advertisements for Levittown, come out to the greener pastures. For $4,800, you can have a beautiful house with a green lawn and a green backyard. And a lot of people did that, including many of the Jews moving out to Long Island and eventually out to New Jersey. So by the 1960s, Brooklyn's Jewish population dropped from, remember, 947,000 in the early 40s to 765,000. So we were losing a lot of the Jewish population. And a lot of them started moving also to a new Brooklyn suburb known as South Florida. A long way to commute, by the way. So we started to lose a lot of that. In 1973, a Brooklyn boy became New York City's first Jewish mayor, A. Beam, and he was the shortest mayor. And if you remember, Marty Markowitz, I think, was the shortest Brooklyn borough president. All right. By 1976, the number of Jews in Brooklyn dropped, that's 1976, to 514,000, almost half of what it was in the early 1940s. And then something interesting happened. In the early 1990s, 1991 to be exact, the collapse of the Soviet Union allowed many Soviets to leave Russia and immigrate here into the United States. Many of them, not all, but many were Jews, and many of them settled here in the Brooklyn area, especially in Brighton Beach. And if you walk along Brighton Beach Avenue today, you see these banners hanging on the lamppost saying, "Little Odessa by the sea." And if you walk on the boardwalk, as Phyllis and I did last week, you hear a lot of Russian language being spoken. You have Tatiana restaurant on the boardwalk, Primorsky on Brighton Beach Avenue. So the Jewish population started to grow. And today, with the Jewish population growing, the number of Jews in Brooklyn today has risen to approximately 600,000, which again is about equal to, if not a little more than the Jewish population in Tel Aviv. So we're slowly moving back up again. Well, with that, let's now talk about some of the very famous Jews in Brooklyn. Who are they? Where did they come from? Well, you look on the screen, this is the front cover of a book called "When You're from Brooklyn, Everything Else is Tokyo." And on the cover is Larry King. That's the book he wrote. And sitting on a Brooklyn brownstone on the stoop with his Brooklyn jacket. And he lived in Bay Ridge. He went to Lafayette High School, and he hung out with his friends on the corner. And the corner for him and his friends was Bay Parkway and 86th Street. And by the way, his name is not really Larry King. His Jewish name is Larry Zeiger, Zeiger. And Larry, when he first started out in show business, broadcasting, was on the radio, and he changed his very ethnic Jewish name to King. All right. Now, there was another King. His name, I'll get it in a little bit. So Larry King, Larry Zeiger. Okay. And here is Larry standing on Stillwell Avenue and Surf Avenue in front of Nathan's. And this picture is from his book, "When You Are From Brooklyn, Everything Else is Tokyo." And wearing his very famous suspenders. Okay, and by the way, he's in front of Nathan's. And speaking of Nathan's, here's a picture of Nathan's taken in the 1920s. And if you look up at the sign at the top, everything is 5 cents. 5 cents for hamburgers, hot dogs, drinks, sodas. Beer was a little bit more than that. I think it was 8 cents. And you can see the dress, the Victorian style long dress, the hat. All the men, except this fella here, is wearing hats. And notice the sign outside over the sidewalk. That sign is still there today. And Nathan, a Polish Jew, came here in just after the turn of the century with his family from Poland. And in 1913, Nathan got a job in Coney Island working at a place called Feldman's. Now, if you know where the Luna Park is in Coney Island, not the original Luna Park, but the one that's on Surf Avenue now, which, by the way, just opened 2 days ago on Friday. for the season, for the first time since the pandemic started, Luna Park will be open on weekends only until Memorial Day, and then it'll be open for the summer. All right. So Nathan Handwerker got a job at Feldman's in 1913. Now, Feldman sounds like a Jewish name, but he was not Jewish. Feldman came from Germany, a German immigrant, and Nathan worked there. And while working there, he met a lovely lady named Ida. They fell in love and got married. And Nathan was there 1913, 14, 15. And during 1916, two of Nathan's co-workers said, hey, Nathan, you and Ida, you know this business inside and out. Why don't you open up your own place? Well, Nathan and Ida thought about it. And they said, you know what? That's not a bad idea. They took all of their savings, $300, and they bought a place a few blocks west of Feldman and undersold his former boss by 5 cents. Feldman was selling everything for a dime, and Nathan and Ida sold everything for a nickel. And it stayed 5 cents until 1939 or 1940 at Nathan's. And by the way, Nathan's co-workers that gave him the idea to open up his own place, Jimmy Durante and Eddie Cantor. Jimmy Durante was Italian. He played the piano and sang at Feldman's. Eddie Cantor, who was Jewish, was a singing waiter at Feldman's. And they gave Nathan the idea to open up his own place. And speaking of Coney Island, anyone remember the name Archibald Leach? Well, he wasn't Jewish, but he changed his name. He was a stilt walker in Coney Island entertaining people. He changed his name and became a very handsome movie star named Cary Grant. And the Marx Brothers, who were Jewish, got their start in Coney Island. Harpo Marx and Groucho Marx worked at a place called Henderson's Dance Hall and Music Hall and Restaurant. Henderson's was located on the same side of the street as Nathan's, but on the other side of Stillwell Avenue. And that building was still standing up until about 3 years ago when it was torn down. Well, Nathan and Ida are still together. And here, thanks to a tour by Alan Zarrow, here are Nathan and Ida, their gravestones. And if you look on top of Nathan's gravestone, somebody placed a rock painted like a hot dog. Right there. Okay. Now, how about some famous people? Well, here's a picture of Richard Dreyfuss. Richard was born in Brooklyn. His family then moved to Queens. And at age 9, they moved out to California. But he was born in Brooklyn. And one of his first movies, if not the first, was American Graffiti. How many remember that movie? And how many remember when he played in the movie Jaws, and he's on the boat, the small fishing boat, trying to catch the shark. And all of a sudden, Richard is sitting at the rear of the boat, trying to load some bait onto a hook. And Jaws leaps up out of the water right next to him. And Richard Dreyfuss jumps back, looks back at the captain and says, "We're going to need a bigger boat." How many remember a TV program called The Education of Max Bickford, starring Richard Dreyfuss? Richard played a college professor in New England. Marcia Gay Harden, an actress, also was a professor at that university. And during that movie, Richard's son, Max Bickford, he plays the role of Max Bickford, says to him, "Daddy, I want to go to Hebrew school. I want to get bar mitzvah." And Max says to his son, "Well, what brought that on?" And his son says, "Well, some of my friends are starting to go to Hebrew school and I want to go also." So Max Bickford says to him, "Well, I got to go talk to a rabbi." Well, they did talk to a rabbi in the sanctuary of Temple Beth Emeth. Now, not Rabbi Kloner at the time, although Rabbi Kloner often was like an actor up on the bema. Well, that photograph of Richard Dreyfuss and Rabbi Kloner hung in Rabbi Kloner's office, and that scene in the show was aired, and the actor playing the rabbi was sitting in one of the pews, Richard Dreyfuss standing next to him, and the big stained glass window of King Solomon is behind him. And that was part of the movie of The Education of Max Bickford. How about the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind? As a science person, it's one of my favorite movies. So Richard Dreyfuss, born in Brooklyn. Whoops. Okay. Now we have this fellow. Now, you're not going to recognize him just from the picture. I photographed this and the one of Richard Dreyfuss from a book called Is Anyone Here from Brooklyn? The book was published in 1991. And this is Murray Kaufman, Murray the K, and the Swingin' Soiree on WINS Rock and Roll Radio in New York. And I'm sure many of you remember rock and roll radio in New York. You had WMCA, WABC, and WINS, three major rock and roll stations in the 1950s into the 1960s. Murray Kaufman lived on Ocean Parkway, right next to one of the wings of Washington Cemetery. And Murray Kaufman and Alan Freed ran the rock and roll shows in downtown Brooklyn. Murray Kaufman ran the shows at the Fox Theater on Livingston Street off Flatbush Avenue, and Alan Freed ran the rock and roll shows at the Brooklyn Paramount Theater, which is now part of Long Island University. And there's talks now that the theater had been, many years ago was turned into the basketball court for Long Island University. Well, there's talk now of changing it back to an entertainment area, because many of the seating of the original Brooklyn Paramount is still there behind the walls of the basketball court. So we're going to have maybe another entertainment venue on Flatbush Avenue. Okay, now we come to Brooklyn's own Sandy Koufax. This is Sandy's rookie picture taken during spring training down in Vero Beach, Florida. Sandy also from Bensonhurst, went to Lafayette High School. He went to Lafayette High School at the same time that Fred Wilpon went. Fred, as you know, is now the former owner of the New York Mets. Okay. And they both went to high school together at Lafayette. John Franco, Lafayette, also pitched for the New York Mets, who was not Jewish. So Fred Wilpon, Larry King, Sandy Koufax, and numerous others went to Lafayette High School, Jewish, who went on and made it big. Sandy Koufax pitched more no-hitters than any other pitcher in Major League history except for one person. Anyone know who that one person is? If you can unmute yourself, you can say who it is.
Nolan Ryan.
Nolan Ryan. Thank you, Alan. Alan, how many no-hitters did Nolan Ryan pitch?
I'm going to pass because he said, I don't want anybody to think that this was a setup.
He pitched 7. Nolan Ryan pitched 7 no-hitters. Koufax 4. No other pitcher has come close. There's been 2, and one of the pitches, it happened at Ebbets Field on June 16th, 1938, the first night game ever to be played at Ebbets Field. Johnny Vandermeer, pitching for the Cincinnati Reds, pitched his 2nd consecutive no-hitter against the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Dodgers complained. The new lighting, it wasn't good enough. We couldn't see the ball. All right, the Three Stooges. Well, here we have, on the left, there's Mo Howard. The bottom is Shemp Howard. Shemp Howard replaced Jerome Howard. Jerome was known as Curly. So you had Mo, Larry, and Curly Howard, and they are from the Bath Beach section of Brooklyn. And their father, by the way, was in the construction business, and he built homes in the Bath Beach and Bensonhurst area. And this third fellow with the big curly hair, that's Larry Fine. Now, he was Jewish too, but he was not from Brooklyn. Larry Fine was from Philadelphia. So here we have the three Stooges, and I had the opportunity to see them on stage live at the Lowe's, let's see, was it the Lowe's Metropolitan in Bensonhurst? I think it was, on 86th Street. At that time, Curly was being played by another Jewish fellow named Joe Besser.
Lois Oriental.
I'm sorry?
Lois Oriental.
Oh, thank you. The Lowe's Oriental. Thank you very much. And so the Lowe's Oriental, it was Mo Howard, Joe Besser, and Shemp. And these were the three, I'm sorry, not Shemp. It was Larry Fine was there. So I'd be able to see them live at the Lowe's Oriental, which is now, I think, it's a men's clothing store now, I think.
No, it's a Marshall's.
A Marshall's store. Okay, now, there are other famous Jews. I'm going to list off some of their names. I don't have pictures of them. Harvey Firestein, Broadway, Harvey Firestein. Elliot Gould, his real name was Elliot Goldstein, married to, at one time, to Barbara Streisand. Harvey Keitel, okay? He went to my alma mater, Abraham Lincoln High School. Martin Landau, remember Martin Landau? He was in the movie North by Northwest with Cary Grant. Eli Wallach went to Erasmus High School. Sam Levinson, also, he went to Brooklyn College, and he also taught for a period of time at, by the way, Sam Levinson, no relation to our own Mr. Levinson, all right? Gabe Kaplan from Welcome Back, Kotter on TV. Mel Brooks, known as Melvin Kaminsky, all right? Eddie Cantor, which I mentioned. Buddy Hackett, okay. Now, here's an interesting thing. Buddy Hackett and who's the comedian that does all the insults? His name?
Don Rickles.
Kenny Youngman.
Thank you, Don Rickles.
Or Don Rickles.
Don Rickles was married at the Elegante Country Club on Ocean Parkway, which doesn't exist anymore, next to the Washington Cemetery. So
That's
Don
where
Rickles
my
was married there.
father made
Buddy
it.
Hackett was a guest at the wedding. I can imagine that must have been one hilarious wedding. Danny Kaye went to Thomas Jefferson High School, and Danny Kaye's wife, Sylvia Fine, wrote the school song for Brooklyn College. I do not know that song, but I'd like to find out what it is. The comedian Alan King, his real name was Alan Nyberg, Kniberg, and he lived in Williamsburg. Jackie Mason. Now, Jackie Mason was raised Orthodox. His name was Yaakov Moshe Maza. And I think his father wanted him to become a rabbi. It didn't quite make it that way. You know what I'm talking about? All right. Jerry Stiller. And Jerry Stiller invented that wonderful holiday known as Festivus from the Seinfeld show. How many of you know? Now, I don't know. I know we got a lot of a senior audience here. How about that? The Beastie Boys from Brooklyn. All right. They're Jewish. Neil Diamond went to Erasmus High School and then transferred over to Abraham Lincoln High School. George and Ira Gershwin. Carole King, whose real name was Carol Klein. And by the way, Neil Sedaka from Brighton Beach. Neil Sedaka's parents had a concession stand at the very, very end of Coney Island Avenue, right at the boardwalk. And there was a big sign on it, it said Sadakas. And when Neil Sedaka came to Marty Markowitz's concerts in the summer, he would always say he's coming back to his homeland. I think he lives out in California now. Now, when Neil Sedaka sang that song, "Oh Carol," he was singing that to Carol King. Marty Glickman, the sports announcer. I mentioned Cal Abrams and Sandy Koufax. And we have some more names here. Now, Alan, correct me if I'm wrong. Jerry Reinsdorf and Al Davis went to Erasmus High School. Is that correct? Unmute yourself, Alan.
Good point. That is absolutely correct. I actually have a letter of congratulations from Al Davis when Erasmus won the PSAL basketball championship. Reinsdorf is the owner of the Bulls and the White Sox, if he still is. Eric can correct me on that one.
And Al Davis was, didn't he coach the Oakland Athletics, I think?
He was the coach and then the owner.
The coach and owner of the Oakland Athletics. And
No,
from what I understand,
No, the Oakland Raiders
the
football.
Oakland Raiders. And if I'm not mistaken, a member of our congregation, Danny Landberg, is the football coach for the Erasmus High School football team. And there was a period of time when Erasmus, the school Erasmus, was disbanded and broken up into multiple different schools, and they didn't have a football team. And then when the football team was resurrected, Danny Landberg, whose parents, Rita and George Landberg, are members of the congregation, Danny became the coach of the new team. And if I'm not mistaken, Al Davis contributed money to help finance uniforms and helmets for the newly resurrected Erasmus football team. And eventually, the year that Hurricane Sandy devastated our area, Danny Landberg and his wife and their baby, they were living out in Rockaway. And it was a time when Erasmus was trying to get to the PSAL championship. Well, Danny, his wife, and the baby were evacuated from their home on rowboats. And Danny jumped out of the rowboat, waded back into the house, got the playbook for the football team, got back into the rowboat, and they ended up winning the PSAL championship. That's a true story. Allie Sherman was coach of the New York Giants football team. He went to Brooklyn College and played on the football team. Now, I'm going to mention a name. You're not going to believe this. His real name was Sidney Frumpkin, but he changed it to Sidney Franklin. And he became a very famous, and by the way, he was raised Orthodox. He became a very famous bullfighter, and that's no bull. Sidney Franklin, a very famous bullfighter, and he was known worldwide, especially in Mexico and in Spain particularly. A Jewish bullfighter, go figure. Arthur Miller, the playwright, went to Abraham Lincoln High School, and for a time he and his family lived, I think it was on East 3rd Street off of Avenue M, adjacent to where Erasmus plays their football games. Woody Allen. Willie Allen's real name is, his last name is Allen Konigsberg. Woody Allen lived on East 14th Street between Avenues K and L, and he went to Midwood High School. And the Eisenstadt family, they are the inventors of Sweet and Low. Those of you who don't want to use sugar, you put a little Sweet and Low in your tea or coffee. Sandra Feldman. Sandra Feldman was president of the New York, the United Federation of Teachers. She's now the president of the American Federation of Teachers. Sandra Feldman, and she's a Brooklyn College grad as well. mean, I can be here all day with all of these names. And I know that there are other programs coming up this morning. Now, I don't know if this book is in print anymore. It's called Is Anyone Here from Brooklyn, published in 1991. And a lot of this information that I got is from that book. And a lot of the information on the history of the Jews of Brooklyn is from a book called The History of Brooklyn Jewry. And that book was published in 1937 by Samuel Abelow. And in that book is the history of Temple Beth Emeth and its sisterhood. It's the history of progressive synagogue and of the Sharazetic synagogue. Is the history of Jewish women's organizations. It's the history of the Hadassah in Brooklyn. So all of that information is available. I think any major library probably would have these books available. If anyone has any questions, click on and let me hear a question. Anybody?
Ron, I think you'd like what I just put up behind me. There is you with the Feldman grave.
Oh, okay. Behind Alan, there it is. If you have it on your screen. Charles, what cemetery is that, Alan?
No, the Nathan grave, not
Oh, the
Feldman.
Nathan. Oh, it's the Nathan Hainwerker grave. Okay. Oh, and that's me.
That's you.
That's me in front of it. Oh, Alan took this picture on one of Alan's tours. Thank you, Alan.
For those of you that are taking the Greenwood thing, I don't think you'll go past it because it is on the Fort Hamilton Parkway side, is the Feldman Mausoleum. Feldman was a rich son of a gun, and he made sure everybody knew it with where he was buried.
Now, there's a name. I don't know if this fellow was Jewish or not, but in Sheepshead Bay, there's a street called Jerome Avenue. There's a Jerome Avenue in the Bronx as well. They're both named after the same fellow, Leonard Jerome. Now, Leonard Jerome's mausoleum is in Greenwood Cemetery, and he was one of the owners of the Sheepshead Bay racetrack at the turn of the century. And he built another racetrack in the Bronx called Jerome Park, and he built Jerome Avenue in the Bronx leading to his racetrack. Now, it sounds like a Jewish name, but I'm not sure whether he was Jewish or not. And Leonard Jerome and his wife, they had a lovely daughter named Jenny Jerome, and lovely young lady. And she lived on Amity Street in the Cobble Hill section of Brooklyn. And she was introduced to a very handsome English gentleman named Lord Randolph Churchill. And they fell in love and got married, moved to England. And Jenny Jerome from Brooklyn gave birth to Winston Churchill. But Winston did not have a Brooklyn accent. Now, Alan, what is the, I think I might be getting this right, I'm not sure. Wyatt Earp, you know, the marshal from Tombstone, Arizona, back in the late 1800s, turn of the century. He met a lovely young lady from Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Her name, I think, was Emma Marcus. Is that right, Alan?
That would be a coincidence.
I know. So
But,
Emma Marcus, as an
I don't know much about Wyatt Earp, except if you want to visit him, he's now in California.
but Emma from Brooklyn, as an 18-year-old young lady, ran away from home in the late 1800s and headed out west. And she ended up in Tombstone and eventually married Wyatt Earp. And I can see them, Wyatt sitting, now remember, she was Jewish from Brooklyn. I can just see Wyatt sitting at the card table with the boys playing poker, and Emma coming in from the kitchen say, "Wyatt, can I serve the bagels and lox now?" And they're both buried in a cemetery, I believe, in San Francisco.
Yeah, they're out in California. The other person of that trio, Bat Masterson, is in Woodlawn in the Bronx, across the street from a Brooklyn person. The reporter, the woman
Okay.
reporter.
Okay, now I want to get to this picture. This picture is a trade card from 1885, and it shows an advertisement for the Wechsler and Abraham dry goods store on Fulton Street, 422 to 432 Fulton Street in downtown Brooklyn. Wechsler and Abraham. Now, that was in 1885. The store opened in 1865. In 1883, when the Brooklyn Bridge opened, some of Abe, by the way, this is Mr. Abraham. Now, at the bottom, it says Abraham, Abraham. That's not a misprint. That is his name, Abe. Mr. Abraham and Mr. Wechsler opened their store in 1865. In 1883, when the Brooklyn Bridge opened, a lot of Abe's friends said, Abe, you ought to move your store further down to the other end of Fulton Street. The original store was closer to Flatbush Avenue. He said, move it further towards where all those horses and wagons are coming off that new bridge. You'll make more money. Well, he thought about it. That was in 1883. 10 years later, Isidore and Nathan Strauss, who helped establish Macy's in Manhattan, they came across the river to Brooklyn. And at that time, Mr. Wechsler wanted to leave the firm, and they bought out Mr. Wechsler, and the new store became Abraham and Strauss. Now, I know a lot of people who are watching this know of Abraham and Strauss. You did a lot of shopping there. One of the best department stores ever. So Abraham and Strauss started in 1893. But it wasn't the store that you went shopping in. 2 years later, in 1895, with the help of Mr. Abraham's money and the Strauss's money, the new department store opened, where it's located right now, unfortunately, as a Macy's. Okay, that's how Abraham and Strauss got started. Here is a 1908 postcard of Abraham and Strauss. And notice the people waiting for the doors to open outside. At the top, you can see there's a clock. It says 8:30. The doors probably open at 9 o'clock in the morning. And the big crowd, probably, of course, it's the day of the one-day sale. And notice the dress of the day. All the ladies wearing long Victorian dresses, all wearing hats, including the men. And this is a 1908 postcard. And along the side, whoever wrote this postcard, it says, "This is where Bessie works." So Bessie worked in that store in 1908. All right. So Abraham and Strauss. Now, Mr. Abraham and the Strauss brothers were multi-millionaire philanthropists and donated many, many thousands and thousands of dollars to worthwhile Jewish charities, including Mr. Abraham, who helped establish the Brooklyn Jewish Hospital. Mr. Abraham was also on the board of several synagogues and other Jewish organizations. And at one time, Mr. Abraham said to one of the congregations, to the Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, you raise $90,000 by the end of the year, and I'll throw in an extra $10,000. And this is how these Jewish workers who own these department stores. Now, if you remember along Fulton Street, those of you who went shopping there, Abraham and Strauss, Martin's department store, a high-end lady store, also owned by Jews. E.J. Corvette. Now, I'm still up in the air about this, but E.J. Corvettes, from what I've been heard from various sources, stood for 8 Jewish Korean veterans.
Oh, Ron, that's not true.
It is not.
No, I worked for Corvettes.
Okay, so it's
Was
not
that
true.
Eugene and Joe Corvette?
Okay, so somebody passed along that, and that story kept going. Then you had the A.I. Nam store, N-A-M-M. Mr. Nam was Jewish. Then you had Loge's department store, Jewish. You had May's department store. All right. All these big department stores all along Fulton Street. And you had a big historic restaurant there, Gage and Tolner, not Jewish. But guess what? This coming week, Gage and Tolner is reopening as Gage and Tolner under new ownership. The building is landmarked, and the interior of Gage and Tolner is landmarked. So it's those of you who did eat there at one time, the interior has been preserved. All right. And so Isidore and Nathan Strauss, again, philanthropy, donating lots of money. In 1912, Isidore and Nathan Strauss were in Palestine long before it became the state of Israel. And while there, they were donating money to Jewish organizations there. And when they were ready to come back home to New York, Nathan said, you know, Isidore, you go back. I'll meet you later on in New York. Isidore never made it back to New York. He and his wife were on the Titanic and never made it back. The city of Netanya, Israel, is named after Nathan Strauss. So that's a little history of some of the Jews from Brooklyn and what they have done. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that was the last slide. Does anyone have any questions? Comments, questions?
Comment for sure.
Okay, Toby.
You are the best. You are absolutely, I have never been to a presentation that I have not enjoyed, and this one is way up there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Toby, very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, Ron, it's Pam.
Yes, Pam.
I'm really intrigued about that picture of Richard Dreyfuss and the from the movie where no, it wasn't the movie.
Not from a movie. It's just a regular picture of him. It's in that book. Is anyone here from Brooklyn?
Is it in that book? Because
Yes.
that would be a good thing to use for the stained glass matching funds drive. Wow.
It's possible. Yes. Okay.
Okay, you have that book, Ron?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so we'll talk. Thank you.
Okay, Pam.
Ron, we can't leave out Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Oh my goodness. You know what? I compiled this list and I should have included, oh my goodness, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Thank you so much, Hazel. Ruth Bader Ginsburg went to public school 238, my alma mater, but she went before I did. She was older than me. PS 238 is on East 8th Street between Avenue P and Quentin Road. I went there and graduated there in 1958. She graduated about 7 or 8 years before me. She went to Madison High School. And wait a minute, what about Chuck Schumer?
Absolutely. He also
Chuck Schumer went to Madison High School.
Yes.
And Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Now here's an interesting thing.
Chuck Schumer was also bar mitzvah at Temple Avat Shalom.
Oh, was he really?
Yes.
Oh,
So
wow.
he's a part of our history.
Oh, good. That's a good thing that we should have that written up. We should know that is really. Now Chuck Schumer still lives in Brooklyn. He lives on Prospect Park West, right across the street from the park. And Bernie Sanders. He grew up on East 26th Street in an apartment house right on the corner of Kings Highway. And he went to Madison High School. He was bar mitzvahed at the Kingsway Jewish Center on Nostrand Avenue in Kings Highway. And Bernie was born across the street from the building he grew up in on Kings Highway. It was called Madison Park Hospital. Now it's called, I believe, Community Hospital. It's part of, I think, Cornell now, I believe. He was born on September 8th, 1941 at Madison Park Hospital. Coincidentally, my older brother, Michael Schweiger, was born in Madison Park Hospital on September 8th, 1941, the same day as Bernie Sanders. Now,
Wow, so was I. So was I, Madison Park.
not on September 8th, 1941.
Oh, no, 1944, February.
Okay, well, it's possible that my mother and Bernie's mother showed off their newborn babies to each other. Now, is it also possible that one of the nurses accidentally switched the babies and Bernie's my brother? I told this to my brother and he almost fell on the floor.
Ron, Arthur Kornberg was a, who I don't know for sure that he's Jewish, but it sounds like he might be. He's a Nobel Prize winner.
From
And-
Lincoln.
Right.
Yes, he went to Abraham Lincoln High School. Yes.
Okay.
I know we're leaving out an awful lot. Remember, by the way, this book, Is Anyone Here from Brooklyn, is not all about Jews. It's about any Brooklynite, no matter what religion or background, and how they went on and excelled in whatever field they excelled in, whether it's entertainment, literature, science, or you name it, sports. It's all in this book up until 1991. That's when the book was published.
Ron, you mentioned Erasmus and Danny and Erasmus Field. Erasmus Field is named after Sid Luckman.
That's right, Sid Luckman.
His parents, his family, they're in Mount Judah, and his father actually had some mafia connections.
The
The
Jewish
house-
mafia.
That not the Russian, not the current Russian mafia.
No.
The house is on Cortelyou Road, not far from Holy Cross Cemetery, because Sid Luckman made such a living in Chicago with the Chicago Bears. He's actually in Skokie.
Uh-huh. Okay, interesting. You find all this interesting stuff, by reading through history, and with what Alan does, going on the website, find the grave, and you find out where both the famous and the infamous are buried. And it's really, by the way, in Greenwood Cemetery, Greenwood is non-sectarian, and Leonard Bernstein is buried in Greenwood Cemetery. And he's buried not far from where the Ebinger family is buried. Those of you who still have a frozen Ebinger's blackout cake in the freezer. And also not far from Charles Ebbets, the owner and builder of Ebbets Field and owner of the Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers. So if you've never been to Greenwood, especially during the pandemic, it's a great outdoor place to walk and explore, and it's not crowded, and the people there are very quiet.
Yes, that's a good point.
Except when Laurie Pandolfo shows me something that I swore was missing. You mentioned Gage and Tollner. Mr. Gage is buried within sighting distance of the person who was on backstage at Ford's Theater at the time Lincoln was killed.
Oh my goodness, look at these connections. Wow.
Ron,
Yes,
the writer Bernard Malamud was raised in Brooklyn at 1111 McDonald Ave.
I'm sorry, who was that again?
Bernard Malamud.
Oh, yes, okay. That's
He wrote
another-
The Tenant.
Uh-huh, yes.
that
And he
book-
went to Erasmus Hall High School
Yes, he did. You beat me to it, Gail.
on Erasmus.
Wait, I have no shame.
Okay, well, there's another program coming up shortly. Any other comments, questions?
Ron,
Yes,
thank you for a wonderful presentation and an enjoyable morning.
It was great.
Thanks again.
and
Thank
thank
you,
you so
Ron.
much.
Nice.
Ron,
Thanks,
it was
Ron.
great.
job.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Thank you very, very
Ron,
much.
Ron,
Good job. We liked it. Yay.
Yay.
Ron,
Yes,
this
Prima.
is Rima. I just wanted to say thank you. And it's
Thank
very enjoyable, you and Alan. And I am not, people that know me know that I'm not a big book reader. And I really enjoy learning these things because you make it very interesting and fun, all of you. And and Hazel, I also bought my wedding gown in Martin's.
Martin.
Wow, nice.
I don't know if I got a discount because my aunt worked there at the time.
No,
Listen.
I went to Martin's. It costed me at that time $160. I remember, which was a lot of money back then. I got married in 1972. And yes, I remember Martin's.
Well,
Thank you.
Hey, folks, this is not Ron and Alan. This is Ron today, because not only did I participate, but so did all of you. So give this up for Ron. This was great, Ron.
Well,
Very nice, Ron.
let me tell you how, you know,
Alan.
Abraham and Strauss department store, Phyllis and I, that was our favorite department store. And when the Federated Department Stores closed A&S to make it a Macy's, Phyllis was so fit to be tied. He was fit to be tied. And she said she's going to write a nasty letter to the Federated Department Stores. And she said, I'm going to cut up my A&S credit card and mail it with them. I said, don't cut up the card. It'll be a collector's item.
Yeah.
Well, we have hanging at the top of the stairs, as we go up from the dining room to the bedrooms, we have framed an A&S shopping bag with our 3 A&S credit cards in there with the frame. About 2 years ago, somebody mailed to me, ready for this? An A&S box that you put like a dress or a coat in, and a Martin's box. So I have that as well.
Nice.
Who has an A&S credit card that went on your key ring?
Oh, I had one. I had one.
I
Yeah.
did too, but I think I
Yes,
finally
yes.
gave it up.
I had one on my key
Regrettable.
ring. Yeah.
We did, it was our first credit card, A&S credit card.
Yes,
on a key.
yes, me too.
Do you remember the custard they had down in the basement underneath one of the escalators? They had a custard
Yes.
stand
Oh,
where you can get chocolate syrup with it or strawberry syrup with it. Anyone remember that?
I do.
Yeah, oh, it was the best.
They also had didn't they have a restaurant in A&S
Yes.
up
That
on?
was my favorite. I used to, that was part of my shopping tour. And we,
Yes.
Don't forget the information lady.
Jerry
that was at
Burns
top of
used to
the
work
podium,
for
like in a
A&S.
pedestal.
I got my ears pierced at A&S.
If you look closely, the A&S insignia is still on the wrought iron railings. Wherever
hey,
you
Ron-
see wrought iron railings, you're gonna see A&S.
Look at
Hey,
that.
hey, Ron. Phil
I love that
Podred.
store.
Hey, Phil.
Ron, Phil Podred here.
Hey, Phil, how you doing?
Great, man. Great job, guy. Let me ask you, you may not know this one. Do you remember the merry-go-round on A&S on the top floor?
No.
No,
Yes.
yeah, I used to work there, A&S.
How did I
at
miss
Chri-
that?
At Christmas time.
Oh, yeah.
At Christmas time. Yep, they had a big child's merry-go-round. And I used to strap the kids in.
Was it at A&S?
Do you
that
all
they had
remember the
I
information?
also worked at the
You all
merry-go-round
remember the
on the-
information lady?
Huh?
How about the information lady in the podium?
Right
by
in
the
front of
yes,
the
yes,
elevators.
Yes, absolutely.
Was it at A&S that they had the guys running the elevators? They had manual operated
Yes.
elevators?
Yes.
Yes.
By
And
the
I
way,
also-
those elevators are gone. They're not there anymore.
Yeah.
And I also remember the wooden treadle escalators.
Yeah.
Before
They still
Steve
have some of
Ballmer.
that there.
They have that in
That's
Mason
still there.
Herald Square too.
I'm gonna eat with you. Now I'll listen to it. That's all.
Can I ask one question?
Sure. You're gonna ask 2 questions.
Aren't there any New Utrecht graduates out there? I've heard
Yes, I'm a New Utrecht graduate,
There you
Toby.
go.
I'm a
mother-
New Utrecht. So is
my
Fran
mother went to New
Arnowitz.
Utrecht.
I'm a New Utrecht graduate, Toby.
Yeah, yay, New Utrecht.
Year of 46.
What about Midwood High School? Anybody out there?
The Hornets.
Yeah.
What
all we
about
have is
John
Woody Allen,
Jay?
not great.
Yeah, I graduated with manual, John Jay.
John Jay. I went to John Jay.
You might be
Right.
very happy to know
Manual.
that they've returned the name John Jay. When they closed John Jay, they made it the High School of Law, Journalism and Research.
Yeah.
But then then there was some problems because there was also a middle school in there. I don't remember. But they went back and they changed it to the John Jay campus. So the John Jay name has returned. Manny, you said you were graduated from manual training? Whoever said they were
Wasn't John
graduating,
Jay originally boys' high school?
no, Manual Training High School. And if you go on the side streets and you look over the doors on the side streets, not on 7th Avenue, but on the side streets, you look over the doors and you can still see the engraving MTHS.
MTHS, that was the cheer,
Wow.
MTHS, JAT. I graduated in 1955, it was the last class as manual, then it became John Jay.
1962, Wingate High. Prior to that was Winthrop Junior High, and prior to that was PS 189. Any Wingaters out there? Probably not.
No.
189.
The
And
Generals.
Yeah, the Generals.
That's right. The
Oh,
Banjo School.
Yeah, that's right.
What was the original location of Boys High School?
Oh, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Um,
I just wanted to add that I went to school with Marty and graduated with Marty Markowitz.
Oh, from Winthrop, yes. Marty went to Winthrop, yes.
Wingate.
Oh, Wingate, Wingate.
Madison
I'm sorry,
Her
Dean.
husband graduated from.
The original
Boys
Boys High
High.
is still there. Madison Street. Oh,
Boys High is off of Marcy. Avenue-
Marcy and Putnam.
Avenue, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
It was, yeah, it's like it was 3 blocks from my store, so I passed it all the time.
Marcy and Putnam. The original Girls High was on Nostrand.
That's Nostrand and Halsey.
Correct.
And they still, the building is still there. They must have redone the Boys High because it looks really nice. I was in it a couple of years ago. I don't remember what it is, but it's still a school. And Girls High, they have, it's not a regular high school. They have it for special, I think it's after school something.
There are new names for it, multiple pathways or whatever, but originally it was called an alternatives high school.
Okay,
The new Boys and Girls is 1700 Fulton off of Utica.
right.
Put it on the floor.
It just doesn't have the character. they were-
Sorry, Sarah, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to mention, you mentioned in passing May's Department Stores, which was not founded by a Brooklyn native, but by Mortimer May, who grew up in Nashville, Tennessee.
Interesting stuff.
Mortimer was the grandson of Lesserman Mai, M-A-I, who lived in Germany his whole life. The great-granddaughter of Lesserman Mai was my grandmother, Lily Levy. So when my grandmother in 1933 was applying for a sponsorship or for an affidavit to come to the United States, the May family signed her affidavit, and she traveled from Stuttgart to the United States in 1933. Later, the Stuttgart consulate stopped accepting affidavits from the May family because they were too liberal with their affidavits, and they got blacklisted. Mortimer May was a first cousin once removed of my grandmother, and employed her when she came to the United States. She worked in his office in Nashville, and I would not be here if it were not for the generosity of the May family.
Well, if you go to the May's department store today, it's an office building now. And if you go, the entrance, I think, is on Bond Street. And if you go into that entrance, there are vintage photographs of, I think, Mr. May hanging on the wall in the lobby there. And also old pictures of downtown Brooklyn as well, hanging in that entrance. Once you enter the building, I think it's on Bond Street, right off of Fulton Street. And that's where the department store was located. Today, it's an office building.
Ron, it's Beverly. I have a question about Alexander's. I don't remember you talking about it. Was that a Jewish ownership?
Well, Alexander, I don't believe it was Jewish. And it was not on Fulton Street. I don't think it was Jewish.
And it
I think
originated.
it was
I think, in
59th
Brown.
Street in Manhattan, if I'm not correct.
No, wasn't it originated in the Bronx?
Oh, you know what? I left out something very interesting about Abraham and Strauss. You ready?
Yeah.
2 clerks that worked for Mr. Abraham in the very early years, the really very early years, were Benjamin
Grant.
Altman and Simon Bloomingdale.
Uh-huh.
B. Altman and Simon Bloomingdale worked for
Oh,
Mr.
Mishpacha.
Abraham.
Oh, mishpacha.
And of course, Altman's is now the Graduate Center on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. And Bloomingdale's is still in business today.
And you should see Altman's grave. Oh, my goodness.
Where is it, Alan?
Salem Fields. It's on the corner of Cypress Hills Road and Jamaica Avenue. A lot of very, very rich Manhattanites are buried there, and the office is incredibly uncooperative with giving
Really?
locations. The first famous Jewish Major League Baseball player is there, and they wouldn't even tell me that one. But anyone who went to City College, the Lewison family is up there. If you remember Lewison Stadium before it got knocked
Yes.
down.
Yes.
Yeah. But
Okay.
anybody that's been on one of my tours, we've been in that cemetery. From Union Temple, Rabbi Dreyfuss is there.
And Chuck Schumer's wife, Iris, they met in college, not in New York City, because I met her mother. She lived in the same building as we did. She was a little girl, the most beautiful little girl anyone ever saw. And her mother told me, I said, what's, and after we both moved out of that apartment house, which was diagonal to where Temple Ahavat Shalom was renting the church on Avenue P. That's where she grew up as a little girl, Chuck Schumer's wife, Iris. And I met her mother a number of years later on the 36 bus, said, what's Iris doing? She met a lawyer in college, and that's Chuck Schumer. And they met in college out of New York City, somewhere up north. And that's who it is, Mrs. Schumer. Thank you. This was the most fantabulous presentation.
It was wonderful.
Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of the day and take care.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank
you, Alan.
Always good, Alan.
Be well, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Ron.
Bye.
Great job.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel, for the presentation.
Thank you,
Yes.
You guys
brother.
are great.
Joel.
Great
Very
job.
good.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure. Have a good week.
Thanks for
Joel. Thanks,
sharing,
Ron.
Joe.